Welcome to my tutorial for Banishing Racer. This was a Japan-only exclusive, so it wasn't released in the US or Europe. It's actually quite a good game. It took me about 4 hours and 50 minutes to beat. So it's really, it's deceptively difficult for how short it is. It's only about a 20-minute game without dying. But yeah, the main thing is it's a memorization heavy game like a lot of these old games. You die in one hit, so you really have to, memorize the levels. But there are a few things that can help. Actually, I beat this a few years ago, so I had to watch the video again and refresh my memory. But I will try to cover everything the best I can based on my memory. But really, there's not really a lot to the game except for memorizing your paths, through the levels. It's the same every time; it never changes. So I don't think there's really any random elements to this game at all. So it's, basically just trial and error. I recommend using save and load states to practice any sections you're having trouble with. So yeah, the second stage here is a flying stage. A lot of times, the second stage of any world, I guess you could call them, would be a flying stage. And when I refer to worlds, I'll be referring to the, I guess you would say, like 1-2 would be a section, 1-3 would be another section, 1-4 would be another section, and the world would be 1. So I guess I'll refer to it like that. If you lose a life, you usually start back at the beginning of a section. I don't know if there's any checkpoints within the sections themselves. Can't remember that. I think you might be able to start back at the bosses if you just lose a life. For these larger trucks, you have to bounce on them twice. You just want to make sure you don't do it while you're underneath the spikes, so let them come out. You don't want to bounce on any enemies when the spikes are above your head in this part. So just wait for them to come out. Some of the larger enemies will take 2 bounces, whereas the smaller enemies usually just take 1. So yeah, if you lose all your lives, you have to start back at the beginning of the world. So if you're at, say, 1-3, and you lose all your lives, you'll have to go back to 1-1. But there are unlimited continues. But you still have to master all the sections. But there are tricks to get 1-ups, which I'll explain. For this boss, very easy. You just hit him, I think at a specific time. I think all you have to do is bounce on his head when you have an opening. I think it's pretty damn basic. You just, obviously don't want to get hit by the fire. The only tricky part in this game with some of the, with hitting things sometimes is getting enough momentum. If you just try to jump without a running start, you don't really move too far. So the momentum does take a little while to build up. You have to hold down B. It's basically your run button. And it takes a little longer than in most games to build up, so you do have to adjust for that, that slow momentum build up. Make sure you have enough speed to, jump as far as you need to. You also have to hit the enemies at a certain angle. It's not super specific, but sometimes if you're a little bit off, you will die when you bounce off enemies. So you have to get used to that. You basically just have to be, high enough in the air when you come down on them. But I remember some enemies it was a little touchy. Another trick in this game that can make it so that you pretty much have unlimited retries on a specific section is there are some parts where, quite a few parts where you can bounce on 4 enemies or projectiles in a row, and if you do that without touching the ground, you get an instant 1-up. So anytime you can exploit that, try to bounce on 4 enemies or projectiles in a row, before touching the ground, you'll get 1-ups. You can rack up a lot of 1-ups in the later levels doing that. So you don't really have to end up starting, back at the beginning of the whole world. You can just start back at the beginning of the section or the last checkpoint. Like I said, there may be checkpoints within the sections. I just don't remember because it's been such a long time. So yeah, there's going to be some basic platforming. The game does get hard later on. At first it's pretty easy. But it gets pretty difficult. Because you don't have a lot of room to mess up since it's one-hit death. So you'll have to start parts back. And if you're not earning 1-ups, then you only have a few lives to try it on. Because some parts, there's not always parts available for you to get the 1-ups. But later on, there's more enemies, so I think it's easier to get, rack up a lot of 1-ups. You do that little trick where you bounce on 4 enemies without touching the ground. See, maybe I do it here. I'm not sure if I got it that time. I didn't see 1-up show up on the screen. I don't think I got it, but it's something similar to that. You have to bounce off and kill 4 enemies before touching the ground. It's quite a good game. I enjoyed it overall. I mean, it was definitely had some frustrating parts because, like I said, it took a while. It took about close to 5 hours to beat. So it's pretty tough. It's one of those games that looks real easy in videos, but it's actually pretty difficult for how short it is. So yeah, there's a hidden bonus stage here. If you make that block appear, you can go in here and get this, and this will give you temporary invincibility, so you can kind of just drive through shit and not worry about bouncing off anything. You can utilize it. Just got to make sure, of course, that you don't hit into somebody just as the invincibility's wearing off. So you got to be careful with that. There may be some kind of little song that plays when you get the invincibility that will give you an indication of when the invincibility is going to end, but I don't remember. I did watch the video yesterday just to refresh my memory a little bit, but as I'm doing the tutorial over the video, there's no sound because I found that the sound mixes with the voice, makes it hard to make out my voice. I'm sure there's a better way to do it, but I'm not real skilled at editing. So yeah, now we're on the flying stage. This is a more difficult one. So you're going to want to, practice this, of course, and know what you can destroy and which, just to get through. Where to hang back on the screen and when to move. This is all kind of your basic trial and error of just learning the flow of the stage. As with usual on my tutorials, I try to just give the basics and not so much step by step on each little thing. I think it's clear what's going on screen, but it's just one of those things you have to practice a little bit. It's not a hard stage from what I remember, but it's a little tricky. It's a short stage, though, like most of the stages. The later stages are pretty long. So yeah, there's a hidden block here. I think you can get some... Oh yeah, there's a 1-up here, so that's useful. You may be able to get that every time you die, which basically means that, you never have to go back to, 3-1 because you can just keep getting the 1-up here. As long as you don't die before you get to that point, I think you can keep doing it. The game does have a good amount of points like that where you can keep getting 1-ups and not have to start back. So yeah, pretty easy level. Very straightforward. Yeah, this was just a playthrough I did where, I just edited the deaths out. So it wasn't designed to be a tutorial or anything like that. So yeah, after this boss throws out the rock, you just jump on him immediately. The only tricky part about it is, it looks really easy, but it's a little tricky because you have to have your momentum building up as he's throwing the rock and kind of jump right as the rock drops. So there's a pretty tight timing to it. But, once you get the rhythm down and, you get it in your muscle memory, it's a pretty easy boss. But you do have to time it pretty tight. Otherwise you do get killed. But like I said, I think if you die on a boss and you have lives remaining, you will start back on the boss, if I remember right. Some of the small details like that might be off, since I beat this a few years ago. Yeah, sometimes you'll see me load state at the beginning of certain sections. It's usually to bypass loading times and things like that. Since this is a game with unlimited continues, I will do that sometimes. So yeah, this is one of the trickier stages, starting out. You have to get on that platform just right for the fish to jump over. You're kind of on the edge of that platform. It's definitely tricky. You have to position yourself right in some of these parts. And it's just really just trial and error like anything else in these games. As long as you stay above the water on these platforms, you won't die. For this one, you have to make some blocks appear to survive. So, just in that area, you just do that. But yeah, very easy. Just move patiently and slowly and make sure you're above the, on a platform that's above the water elevation. It's very easy. The game is a strange mix. Some stages are extremely easy and then some are very hard. So it's kind of a mix. So this is kind of like the version of the flying stage, but instead it's a submarine. So it handles a little bit slower and differently, but it's pretty much just a very small variation on the flying stages that are, on every second section of each world. The spikes are a little tricky. You got to kind of tap the, tap the swim button, I guess it is, very lightly and just kind of move forward that way. If you hold it for a little bit too long, you go up into the spikes, obviously. And then you got to watch out for the fish on top of that. So you want to be positioned a little bit higher than the fish is so that when the fish hits into you, it gets killed. So it's just a little bit of positioning. It's a little tricky, but it's similar to a swimming stage in the Mario games or something like that. It's not too difficult, but it can be touchy. This game can be a little touchy, and it's easy to die. But you'll get used to it after a while. So yeah, this stage is pretty tough, but you can start off with a 1-up. So by bouncing on all 4 of those guys like that each time, you'll get the 1-up. So if you keep dying, as long as you can pull that off each time, you'll have unlimited lives. Until, you start messing up and dying on that part. But as long as you can keep pulling it off, you're going to get a 1-up each time. The game definitely starts getting a lot harder by this point. So, there's going to be a lot of little trial and error memorization of which guys to bounce off of and how to position yourself. For the conveyor belts, you want to keep your momentum going the entire time, but you want to kind of tap the run button to keep it going. Forward and run and just keep it going. Because if you let off and stop running on the conveyor belt, you won't be able to get enough speed and time to get under the crusher. So you got to you pretty much have to keep running as the conveyor belt is going. Even when you're not moving forward, you want to keep running in place and be ready to move forward. As soon as the crusher, hits the conveyor belt, you should be moving forward with the momentum you've been building up. But yeah, for the most part, it's just going to be memorizing how to move through the level. But luckily, you do get that 1-up each time as long as you can bounce on those 4 enemies in the beginning without touching the ground. And this may be the final stage. I think it is. This is where the game gets quite difficult. See, if you can bounce on all those guys, you get a 1-up right off the bat on that. Then you can get another 1-up here. And then I get a third 1-up in this next area. So if you can duplicate that, by doing it like I did there pretty much, you'll get 3 1-ups at the beginning of the stage each time. So if you die, you'll always get another 3 lives. So, even if you just get 1, you'll be able to stay. You'll be able to keep trying to stay. Do you see? Look how many 1-ups I had. I think I may have even farmed 1-ups here, and committed suicide intentionally to farm 1-ups. You can farm 1-ups because you'll die once, but you'll get 2 additional 1-ups. So, if you want, you can farm lives at that part as well. Just commit suicide after you get your 3 1-ups and keep doing it. But here you get a bunch of 1-ups as well, so you don't have to farm in that first stage if you don't want to. I think you may have more 1-ups than what it shows on the screen when you fill up the screen with 1-ups, as you can see them in the top middle. But you see the areas where I was able to get the 1-ups. I got a few more just now. So These parts are tricky, though. If you don't land on the turtles just right, you die, and you have very narrow. The ceiling is very low in the first part. But yeah, try to get as many 1-ups as you can off of these guys. That way, if you die, you'll just keep getting. You'll be getting shitloads of 1-ups. So for these first 2 stages, there's really no reason to have to start back at the first stage again, because you can just get so many lives. You should have an excess of lives for the final areas, just from these first 2 stages alone. You want to try to get all these turtles, under you, obviously. When they group together underneath you, you want to bounce on them all at once, pretty much. So it takes a little bit of timing, but it's not, those parts are not too difficult. It's a little tricky when you have that narrow space when you're on the top of the train and the ceiling is really low and you have to try to crush the turtles. That's very touchy. But luckily you get so many 1-ups, you can fuck up quite a bit and still, get through eventually. So yeah, here I like to let those first 2 guys jump over me. I don't try to fight them. This is the hardest of the stages, I believe, from what I remember. This is quite a difficult stage. I recommend taking the paths that you see me take because there was a reason I took them. Usually it was because it was shorter and easier. So if you see me take a certain, because there are multiple paths at certain points, if you see me take a certain path, I really don't have to explain that too much. Just follow what I did with the path. I probably died a lot on this. I did die a lot on this level, so you're seeing the best of what I came up with after dying a bunch of times. So I recommend it. But yeah, see, some of these maneuvers are tight. You have to crush the guy in a very tight space, and that can be difficult to do. Because of course, if you get hit once, you're dead, and you have to be precise with your attacks. Sometimes you'll bounce off a guy and die, and it's not really clear exactly why you died. So it can be touchy. But you get better with it. So here you're just going to go under and around. Now instead of taking this upper path, which I was doing for a long time, I found you can just jump this gap down here. Like that. And see, it makes it much easier than trying to go up around there and bounce off all that shit. Very dangerous. I died a lot on that. But there was no need for me to do any of that. I could just take the bottom path. So I think as long as you get a running start, you can jump that gap. It's not hard. For this part, I take the path that has the circle on the sign, I believe. But again, just follow the paths you see me taking. The other path may be okay, too. There's another path, I think, that leads out. One is a dead end, I believe, that will just kill you. But the other one, I think you can get through as well. There's another one that you can get through, but for whatever reason, I took that one. I don't know if it was better, but it was easy enough. So, yeah, now, I believe that was the hardest stage of the game. So, if you got through that, you're pretty much done with the game. The boss is not too difficult. This is the final boss. It's a little bit tricky. Basically, though, what you're going to do is climb the missiles up and bounce off the boss. So, the first one, he's very low to the ground. Very easy to bounce off of his head. Just climb on one of the missiles and bounce off of him. For the second one, he gets a little bit taller for the second hit. But you don't have to bounce off of both missiles. You can actually just bounce off the first one like this. I think I did it on the... I do it pretty soon. You just bounce off one missile. I was trying to bounce off both, which is tricky to do. Because it's such a floaty bounce. You only need to bounce off one missile to get on his head. So don't worry about trying to bounce off all of them. See, one missile and just bounce off of them. And now he's at his tallest. I think for this one, you have to bounce off 2 missiles to get on his head. Though I'm not 100% on that. No, maybe. I almost did it with 1 missile, so I'm not sure. You may be able to get up there, but I mean, it's easy enough. Just make sure you have enough height. Okay, yeah, you only need to bounce off 1 missile on all the forms, I guess. to get the maximum height, to be able to get on top of him and destroy him. It is a little tricky, though, because it's touchy with bouncing off the missiles and the boss. So sometimes it goes wrong. But like I said, you can amass so many lives on the previous stages. I mean, just use save and load states, heavily to practice, all the bosses, because they appear like simple patterns, but sometimes it's a little touchy with the hit detection. So you want to practice and make sure you don't get there and then, lose all your lives, have to start the whole area over. So just practice it with save and load states. Any sections that give you trouble, even sections within the levels themselves, it's good to practice with save and load states on an emulator. But yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching.